is enough? Is it a number in your bank account? A title on your business card? A feeling you're chasing but you can't define?
Today on The Fi Guys, we're diving into this age-old question. Why do so many of us spend our lives comparing, striving, and accumulating, only to still feel like we're falling short?
Stick with us as we challenge the way you think about success, satisfaction, and what it really means to have enough. Because maybe, just maybe, the answer isn't out there. It's been within you all along.
This is The Fi Guys. Let's get philosophical. So, Dominic, how do you know when you reached enough? Is it a number, a feeling, or maybe something else entirely? I think it's a question that we don't ask ourselves enough. And when we finally do, we often answer it by comparing ourselves to other people instead of reflecting internally to see what is enough. So I'd like to pose to you the question to start off with, what to you is enough?
You know, when you were talking just now, I was thinking about what you're talking about really deeply. And if you've been a fan of the podcast, if you've been listening in, maybe this is your first time, you know, here on The Fi Guys, we talk about finance, we talk about philosophy, we talk about fitness, right? And oftentimes your boy oftentimes brings up food, right? So the kind of the way that I was thinking, like, what is enough, right? I equated it just now to food, right? When you're at the dinner table, right? You clear your plate. Well, you had enough food, right? Is your stomach full? Okay, your stomach might be full. Your stomach has had enough, but there's other factors, right? In your mind, do you want to eat more, right? And I think that's where it kind of differs for me, right? Being enough mentally and physically, but also socially as well, right? Maybe everybody at my table, they are having 3, 4, 5 slices of pizza, and I just had 1 slice. Well, but I feel like I have enough. I feel physically good. I feel good. Like, I don't feel sick. Mentally, I'm like, well, maybe I could go for another slice. And socially, everyone else is having more. Why not me? You know? And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to calculate what is enough. Because the other people at my table, they're not me. They could never be me. Even if they were my twin, they're still not me. You know, they might be a football player, huge appetite. They might be a cheerleader, right? Small appetite. Who am I comparing myself to? Well, if 1 slice is enough for the cheerleader and 5 slices is enough for the football player, well, where do I stand? You know, I'm the punter, but I'm also on the cheer team. What happened? You know? So that's kind of right where my mind leapt off on our philosophical journey today of what is enough. And maybe you guys have your own analogy in your own mind on what is enough. And I'm sure there's so many other factors, right? Besides physically, emotionally, mentally, socially, responsible, sometimes you have to take on more because it's your duty, it's your responsibility to take on more, right? Have more assets so your family can have a better life, right? Well, I have to do more for them. But again, it's like you want to give your kids the world. So nothing is ever good enough for your kids, possibly. That's kind of where I leapt off today.
Let me go ahead and respond with the Webster's definition of enough as what might be a good jumping off point from what you brought up. Webster's defines enough as occurring in such quantity, quality, or scope as to fully meet the demands, needs, or expectations of an individual or group. But how often do we actually stop to figure out what our own needs are and our expectations really are? I think as we go through and we explore this concept of enough, you've kind of brought it up already with your comparison towards eating and the dangers of that comparison trap, of comparing ourselves to other people for what is enough. And it's something that I've been trying to shift my focus on. And that's kind of my goal actually for 2025 is to figure out what is this enough? Is it something out there that I can find if I just reach a magic number? Or is it something that's internal to me? And I really think about this since we are the Fi Guys, financial independence guys. I really think about this in the realm of our financial independence journey. I think people on the FIRE movement, they start by chasing numbers. We've all focused on our savings rate, on hitting our FI goal, whatever that number might be. But what happens when you actually reach it is you still don't feel, and I can speak to this personally, that it is enough. So I'd like to pose this question so our audience members can hear it before they believe that once I reach this end of the magic rainbow, I'll finally be there. I'll finally have enough. I will finally be enough. Because maybe it's not about the money. Maybe enough is more about your time, your relationships, and your purpose. But we put in a quantifiable metric like money, because looking at what is our time, our relationship, our purpose, it's a bit more opaque. It's a bit more hard to define. It's nearly impossible to compare to other people.
You said something in there that I thought was interesting, and I don't know if you meant to say, well, I'm sure you meant to say it, but it triggered a thought. I think in the only way to know how much enough is for you, one of the first steps to finding that answer is you have to be enough for yourself. And that kind of goes back to saying we love to say here on the channel is, know thyself. Know thyself, right? If you don't know yourself, you can't really move in one way or another. And if you're not enough for yourself, how can you get to enough? And that is that's like Alice in Wonderland. You're jumping into the rabbit hole right there. I understand that that's not easy. That might be an even tougher question than what is enough, is how to accept, how to be enough. That might be an even tougher question.
I think that individuals, I can only speak for myself, is that before this last year, I guess, would very rarely, if ever, define what enough was for myself. Instead, I would look to other people and use them as my measuring stick. Mm-hmm. And what I found, especially last year, was that was just a comparison trap, because it kept on moving the goalpost. And as I would finally reach the end zone, which I thought it was, I would realize that, there was someone else who was higher than me. And it just kept me, and I talked to other people in my coaching program, it just keeps people striving for something more, something that might finally get to them there, to enough, when that enough might not be a destination. It's a place. It's kind of like that old saying, wherever you go, there you are. People are trying to escape themselves to get to enough. But no matter where they get to, they are still there with them. And that feeling of I'm not enough continues to come up. So people look at the externals. Oh, it's the money, it's the house, it's the cars, it's my wife, my husband. That's the issue, not me. Because I think the looking inside to say that maybe it's an internal thing is substantially harder.
Yeah, I would agree. 100%. So easy to, we live in a world of judgment. Everywhere you go. I was at work today. I heard maybe 5 or 6 or 7 judgments outward. How often do you hear an inward judgment? And how often do you hear an inward judgment from a place of constructive criticism? It's always self-destructive. Idiot. Why did I do that? Stupid. Negative. Chris said something last podcast. A lot of life's knowledge comes from reflection, right? I believe in that wholeheartedly. And I think it's so amazing, this gift that we've been given, this brain, this body, this experience we call life, because everything we need, we already have. It's all up here. It's all in the mind. Chris and I, we love to work out. Go to the gym, Chris does trail running, does biking, we do stuff, right? There's a physical appearance change to what we're doing. We're physically getting stronger, right? But most of us don't take time to go to the mental gym. Some of that requires suffering. Maybe getting in the cold plunge at 4 a.m. Maybe it's going to the gym and doing cardio. We don't like cardio. Some of it's reflecting. A couple of weeks back, we had an episode on the 7 steps for a successful 2025, an annual review of last year, right? To set you up for a better year. And one of the main things, basically the entire podcast is about reflection. I think we live in such a fast-paced world that we think the past doesn't matter. But really, the past holds all the knowledge to a better future. And I love that quote you said earlier, wherever you go, there you are. Wherever you go, there you are.
As I think about what is enough, and I bring this question up not only to myself, but I also bring it up to my clients, to people that I coach too, so that they can reflect on that. And I find that one of the best ways that I learn is through them, through their reflecting on their own lives and being like, oh, okay, I see where you're going with this. And what it feels like is that enough is deeply subjective to us as the individual. For some people, it's a small house, but a lot of free time. For other people, it could be like a high-powered career with really big rewards, big house, big cars, big flash. And I think the problem is when we let societal or cultural pressures dictate what quote unquote enough should look like for us as individuals. I think the hardest thing for all people to do, at least for me, is to align our version of enough with your own values, not someone else's values. And, in FI terms, from like a financial realm, I kind of think of enough might just mean that you have a financial cushion that sustains your desired lifestyle. But that doesn't mean that you have to have buku bucks. I know from us, we've had people on the podcast who've kind of talked about their net worths, what they have, their assets. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, like, what's wrong with me? Like, I don't have any of that. And I feel like I'm in their same place. Is there something wrong with me? Are they more enough than I am enough? And I think it's that comparison trap that gets us so stuck in everything. Because if you want to look at it, enough is 100% subjective. I would say that would be the ideal. That's what we look at. I would say it'd probably be even more ideal if you look at it objectively. What does 1,000 people say? But we don't do that. We take it a level deeper to make it even worse on ourselves. And we do it comparatively. Enough for us is done off of comparison to other people. And not other people that are within our sphere of influence, not our family members, not ourselves, not our neighbors. We do it to the top 1% of social media, who is showing us their curated perfect life to our internals. And I wonder if that's why there's such a unease in society right now of people constantly striving, not feeling enough, always being angry. I couldn't imagine, or actually I can't imagine because I know what it's like to never feel like you've reached that destination. You're always upset. Everything is like a hairpin trigger to just tell you like, hey, Dominic, you are not enough. You fundamentally should not even be here. And maybe that's the reason that so many people are so angry.
You said a lot of great points there. I wanted to go back on one of them, talking about how we base enough off of society. And I really wonder, what would enough be to you if the world was empty? If there were no social class? If you didn't get calls from people who had 5-10 times more money than you, had better relations than you, had more kids than you, had everything you want, what would enough look like if comparison wasn't an emotion you had? My dad, I don't talk about him too much on the podcast, but big shout out to you, Dad. We love you. He's been a great example to me on not caring what other people think. He lives his life on his own terms. And to me, he has a portion of enough, right? I don't know if it's in our DNA to be satisfied. You know what I mean, Chris? Like back in the day, and I'm not talking yesterday, I'm talking way back in the day. Man, if we were satisfied, that's death. We didn't know when the next meal was coming from. We had to hunt. We had to find we had to gather, we had to build. Like our life depended on it, because it did. And we're trying to rewrite basically our DNA. I've been thinking about what is enough for the last couple weeks now. And I've gotten closer, but I haven't pinned it down. And I think that's how it'll stay. I was going to say this for the end of the podcast, but I'll say it now. For me, I kind of have a vision of what enough looks like. Not a number. It's more of an emotion. Which is dangerous because emotions fluctuate so rapidly, right? Very dangerous, right? But it's tied to an irreversible event, the emotion. So it kind of levels it off a bit. So for me, enough is me sitting in the hospital, old, 90, 100, whatever. And it's just me. And I know that I don't have a lot of time left. In fact, I have no time left. There's no sand in my hourglass. But I get to look back on the decisions that I made. And if I was a good person, did I help enough people? Did I protect enough people? Did I teach enough people? Did I learn enough? And it's one of those things that keeps you up at night, gets you up out of bed, scares you a little bit. I think some level of anxiety and stress is good, brings out the best of people. And to me, that's my stress, that's my anxiety, getting to the end. And that's the scary part, right? My vision is me at 90, 100, 120 maybe. I don't know. We'll see. But it could be next year. This could be my final year. This could be my final chapter. I might think, yeah, hey, I'm in the first quarter. No, you're in the fourth. You're in the bottom of the ninth, baby. It's almost over, So it's that level of vision. It's that kind of vision that kind of fuels me to say, well, have you done enough?
I could see that being very difficult if your thought process, which we're going to get to at the end of the podcast, of what enough is something you can't know until you're 90, 100 years old, till you're on your deathbed. If that's by definition then you can never be enough right now, which might be really difficult for you to kind of go through life that way. Earlier you brought up the comparison trap, and I was kind of thinking of like, where does this enoughness come from? And you did talk about like back in the day, and like we're talking like way back in the day, like 10,000 years ago, hunter-gatherer on the savannah type of day. And I think back then, comparison made sense because you were ensuring that you had enough for your survival, for your immediate needs, not thriving, surviving. Do I have food? Do I have shelter? Do I have nourishment? That's all I care about. But we've moved into a new realm in the 21st century, but our brain does not know that. We've moved from the survival. I mean, there are some people who are still in survival, but majority of us, we're in thriving, and we're trying to compare ourselves in this thriving way, the same way that we do survival. And in our modern world, that comparison becomes maladaptive because it's not about survival anymore. It's about status. And that becomes extremely dangerous. I think the reason we have this never being able to reach the enoughness is if you think of a squirrel 10,000 years ago. If you found a squirrel who found a nut, he ate his nut and he's like, I'm good forever. That squirrel immediately died and his genes did not propagate. It was only the squirrel that found a nut was like, okay, I have one nut. I need another one though. And went and found another nut and another nut and another nut and another nut. It was able to survive the winter and then pass down his genes. And then those genes passed down and passed down and passed down and passed down. The squirrel, the monkey, the human, early human that had enough one time, they had the perfect meal, the perfect bath, the perfect sexual encounter. And then they're just like, I'm done. It didn't work for them. Their genes are not in us today. The only genes that made it down the line were the ones that kept on striving, kept on getting more, because it was about survival, not about status, not about thriving.
Do you think that we become too comfortable as a society? Do you think that we're no longer in that survival mentality?
Yes.
Okay.
And unfortunately, if you look at like Ray Dalio, he talks about the ups and downs or the rises and falls of all civilizations. And I think he has that as a 6-step process. And he puts America currently at like step 5. Step 6 is civil war, restructure, or like full demise of that civilization. And when I look about like what goes on online, and I don't know, maybe a lot of it's bots, maybe a lot of it isn't actually real. Who really knows? From my daily interactions that I have with people, I don't meet very many crazy people. But that could just be because of where I live. I don't know. I only have so much ability to meet people. But yes, I think that when stuff really hits the fan, when you're in a war, when survival is on the line, it's no longer about thriving. It is about survival. Do people's true colors come out? And do we actually realize what actually matters? And what actually matters isn't the status, isn't having all these things. It is just baseline survival. So yes, I do think that people are maybe weaker, maybe have lost, maybe not weaker, but have lost touch with what is really important. with what really matters. So I think we've kind of talked a little bit about why we compare ourselves to others and why that's such a bad thing to compare ourselves to others, because the goalpost is always moving. No matter how high you go, there's always someone that's a little bit higher above you. We have a lack of context. We see our outcomes. We see people's outcomes, but we don't know the struggle behind them. And then it erodes our gratitude, because when we're comparing ourselves, it blinds us to the abundance that we already have. Because if we're only looking upwards at other people, we don't realize how much is on our current level, because we're only looking up. We're looking at the one thing we don't have rather than the 10,000 things that we do have. So earlier I talked about comparison. I talked about objective measurements of what is enough, and I've talked about subjective measurements of what is enough. So we've kind of beaten the comparison thing we beat that horse, and we kind of know that we shouldn't do that. So I think the next thing we should maybe talk about is using objective measures for what is enough, and why that might be better than comparison, but still not perfect. Because when we're doing an objective assessment of what is enough, it requires clarity, it requires data, and it requires a willingness to confront baseline reality. And I think most people avoid this because it's uncomfortable and it requires a lot of effort. And what I mean by that is it maybe takes budgeting, inventory of your assets, understanding where you actually are objectively. Not the feelings of your finance, not the feelings, the actual physics of it. And the actual physics of it is one of the most hard things for people to find. And I was talking with a person who was going to be entering into my coaching program, and I was asking them this question: what is enough? Like, at what rate? And they're like, oh, if I was able to make $150,000 a year from my retirement, from my investments, I'd be good. And I was like, okay, cool. Where do you get that 150 from? And they're like, I don't know. It's just like 150. It's just 150,000. It's more than enough. And I was like, okay, well, how much are you spending today? And I'm like, I don't know. How much are you going to spend in the future? I don't know. Even if that person was to reach the $150,000 a year, I think that would lack emotional resonance. Even if they saved the amount and they had all this stuff, it's not about having the money. It's about what the money allows you to do. And that's where we need to move from the objective measures to the subjective measures. Because objectively, yeah, $150,000 reasonably should be enough for everybody. Mm-hmm. There are people that are living off $30,000 a year, and they have enough. And there's people that are living off of millions of dollars a year, and they have enough. What are your thoughts, Dominic?
Well, they did a study, and they found that some of the happiest people in the world actually come from some of the most poor countries. And we look down on these people, man, these guys living in a hut. He has to walk a mile for water. The electricity isn't a thing that's common over there. But they're happier. You said something I just wanted to touch, and you're feeding me, and I'm like, I'm just going in my brain. And you said, comparison is the opposite of gratitude. You can't be grateful and compare yourself at the same time. Comparison is looking up at people, and gratitude is looking inside. So I wonder, like you said, comparison was a strategy and a technique we used to use to stay alive, and now the tool has become evil. How much is that Louis bag worth when you don't have food?
It's kind of like you could be the richest man in the world, fly on your private jet, but if that private jet falls or crashes on a desert island and you're the only one that survives, you can have all the money in the world. Those animals on that island don't give two spits about what money you have. That's truly when what is enough really matters. I think that's when we need to actually start to figure that out. And that's where we need to start to look towards subjective measures of what is enough, not objective measures, not even comparative measures, because we know what the issues are with both of those. But I think the reason that most people don't look at the subjective measures is because it demands introspection and 100% emotional honesty. You need to stare in the mirror naked at your inadequacies and be willing to look at that, which can be extremely challenging, both emotionally, physically. And especially in a world in which we value external validation far more than we do our internal validation and alignment. And I think for most people, they're disconnected from their own values. And that makes it difficult, if not impossible, to assess what truly matters to you if you don't know what your values are because you're too busy using external measures or yardsticks to see where you are compared to other people. Say you're someone who doesn't care about a big house, doesn't care about a big car, and you're just happy with where you are. That's a subjective measure that no one can take away from you.
You know, in David Goggins' first book, Can't Hurt Me, he talks about the accountability mirror. And here on the podcast, we talk a lot about how a lot of life's troubles and unhappinesses and problems stem from the fact that most of us can't sit in a quiet room alone with our thoughts. You know, we've been pondering this question for about 30 minutes now about what is enough, right? And I hope you're starting to understand and realize that this doesn't seem like it would be the first question on the checklist. Logically, you know, we have to have a finish line. We've got to have a goal if we're trying to score, and I totally understand that. But this is an end game question. This is a master level question. This is like the last question to be asked because it's the most difficult, because you need to have so many other questions answered before you can get to that question. Because if you ask a kid what is enough, they'll be like, man, about 10,000 boxes of Legos and maybe a candy store and maybe $1 million. I don't know. And you, I mean, Chris, you talk to these adults, and like you said a couple minutes ago, well, if I had $150,000 a year income from my investments, I'd be okay. And it's no different from the kid. The answers are pulled out of nowhere. They're pulled out of nowhere. And I'm not saying you need to be enough to know what enough is, but that's definitely a great direction. I think too often we're looking to make the right step. I gotta make, okay, this step, this step, and this step, and this step, and that's how I get to the end. It's like, no, just go in the right direction.
Yep.
And you'll find your path. Because Chris's path is different than my path, and mine is much different from his. And ours is different from yours. And there's a million ways to carve a turkey. You just got to start and find your own path, but you got to be going in the right direction and have that mindset of, hey, not every step's going to be the right step. But as long as we're in the right direction, we're going to find a goal that we can live with.
And I would take it another step further. Even if you walk in the wrong direction, one step in the wrong direction is at least a step. And then you learn best from your failures than you do your successes. Failure is the most data-rich stream of information that we have. So I think the most important thing is you just start moving forward. You know, earlier, Dominic, before we even started the podcast, you asked me, hey, how's everything going with the business? How's everything going? I was just like, it's ups and downs, man. This morning, Mons on Wealth, we have 3 different means of bringing in clients. And, it doesn't matter how good your product is. If you don't have a good marketing machine, it literally means nothing, because now you're just like shouting into the void. And, I found out that a few weeks ago, our main system went down. There was something wrong with it. So I had to take basically a month off to revamp the system, try to figure it out. And we relaunched a few days ago. And I found out that there's another issue with the system after like taking a month off. And now there's still another issue. And immediately my brain goes to where my brain goes. And I've talked about this before about, if you have just the meanest friend in the back room who anytime like you trip, you do anything, they're just like, oh, you're such an idiot. Like you're such a failure, all these things. And that brain started going off. That inner critic started being like, you messed up somewhere. You're a failure. This isn't going to work out. You did this, blah, 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 blah. And I think even that has to do with this enoughness, because, I've kind of brought this up before. You can't hurt yourself, or other people can't hurt you with their words unless you choose to allow that to hurt you. And the only way that we choose to allow that to hurt us is if we know that part of it might be true. When it comes to this enoughness, maybe that's just my inner critic. And maybe it's just something that I need to work on to be like, hey, you are enough. And just because you mess up or you fail, that does not mean you're a failure, because you're still moving forward, you're still doing your thing. And it's really difficult to rewire that. That's something I'm still working on. I've been working on for the past decade, and it's, small increments, but at least I'm taking the steps, and I know that there is an issue to try to figure out. It's really difficult when you feel that you are complete, like you're in your final form, that you are currently there, and know that you aren't there. You are enough right now. You are perfect the way you are, and you can go substantially farther. And that's hard for our brains to deal with, that ambiguity, those two things being true simultaneously. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how to quell that inner critic through understanding that I am enough. And even if things fail, that doesn't mean that I am the failure. I am the issue point. Because something that has advanced me in terms of my life has been taking extreme ownership, like going back to Jocko, and learning that methodology of no matter what happens in life, it is your fault. And I take that into so many different realms of my life. And I always thought that was a good thing. But anything taken to an extreme can be pathological. And I think at this point, I've taken it too far to an extreme that it's pathological. And that no longer it's, oh, this is your fault. It's, this is your fault and you're a failure because of it, because of all of these other things. And those voices come at me so fast that I don't even hear the voices. I just get the story that you're a failure because of all these reasons. What do you think about that?
I think it's important. You're so right. You're so right. Anything taken to an extreme can be dangerous, right? And I know you're not an ordinary guy. You always take things to the extreme. It's not enough to do a cold plunge. Let's set it even colder. It's not enough to be in there for 30 seconds. Let's do 4 minutes, right? It's not enough to wake up at 9 and do it. Let's do it at 4, right? You're a man of excellence, of greatness, right? And one thing that you were talking about in Jocko's book, right? Every extreme ownership, anything that happens in your sphere, it's your fault. And I think that's a great message. Taking ownership, taking accountability, I think it's a great message. And maybe if you've never read the book, that concept might not make much sense to you. So I highly recommend going and reading Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. But I think also things can be built on a foundation that wasn't ready for it. Like you said, you have this guy in the back of your head, super mean, the meanest guy, and then double it. That's him, right? And you were saying hey, I've adopted this methodology, this way of thinking, and it's helped me. It's transformed me. It's really shaped your entire life. But I think there's an add-on to Jocko's teachings, right? Everything in your sphere is your fault, and that's okay. That's okay. It's late to work. That's my fault. Okay? I got there in one piece. My business is failing. It's my fault. Right? My car won't start. It's my fault. That's okay. That's okay. That's okay. Because we're just too hard on ourselves. And there's a time and a place. There's a time and a place to be hard on yourself, but not all the time. Not all the time.
I was thinking one other thing Jocko says is no matter what's happening, good.
Yeah.
Hey, your main marketing system is down. Good. That gives us ability to look for another one. So just because I think it's just so hard to not, I always talk about it that two things can be true simultaneously, and my brain immediately goes to black and white thinking, especially when it comes to things that I feel like I messed up. Even a few weeks ago, so I had a tooth replaced, or not a tooth, but old fillings from when I was a kid. After 20, 30 years, it needed to be replaced. So went ahead and got that replaced, and it was just hurting and hurting and hurting. And in my brain, it was like, you're a failure. Your tooth hurts because you messed up. Not that the dentist could have done something wrong. Not that the filling could have been messed up. You somehow messed it up. Even though I literally did nothing but went to the dentist and opened my mouth and they did that. So I think anything taken to an extreme can be pathological. And I'm trying to figure out how to work through that. And the thing that I've come to maybe be able to bring this full circle for our audience members to maybe redefine what is enough. We talked about this a few weeks ago on the 7 steps for our year in review, but in order to break free from the comparison trap, we need to focus inward. And when we focus inward, we realize how much we have. And when we realize how much we have, we get to show gratitude for the things that we do have, not the things that we don't have. So what I might suggest to our listener, and even to myself, most research is me search, is to list down what things you have in your life, and not your material possessions, but list down or reflect on your experiences, your relationships, and opportunities that you have, and your values. What things are most important to you. And I think as you write those things down for the things you're grateful for, you'll realize that the material possessions don't really matter. I mean, for example, if you woke up tomorrow with only the things you were grateful for today, what would you have? Because I'd have to imagine that it wouldn't be my money in my bank account. Like, yes, that is good, but you're not grateful for that money. You're grateful for your family members, your relationships, your animals. You're grateful for love. Like, at the end of the day, like, all things come back down to like those fundamental truths that like grandma used to tell me, like, oh yeah, the world is run by love. And you'd be like, no, it is run by money. But like, maybe she was right. Maybe all of our grandmas were right. Maybe that ancient wisdom was correct, but we perverted it by making a new God that we all worship. And I think it's Jordan Peterson that talks a lot about that we all have a God-shaped hole inside of us. And when we killed religion, when we killed Christianity, all of these religions to say like God isn't real, and we usurped it with money, with capitalism, with whatever, now we're kind of coming to this place where we don't know what we're supposed to be striving for. We don't listen to our inner wisdom because we're too busy comparing ourselves to other people. And I think that when you start to question this, what is enough, you can start to look inwards to figure out what are the most important things. What truly is enough?
Yeah, like I said before, it's the last question, final question. It's the most difficult question. I don't think perfection can be achieved, but it can be strived for. And I think the pressure of perfection only creates a life that was poorly designed. Failure it's like the superfood of knowledge. And by that logic, fail fast and fail often, and reflect and learn on it so that you can learn more about yourself. We say know thyself so much on this podcast, and it's almost like a meme now. Know thyself, Sun Tzu. But if you sit with that question long enough, it starts to eat at you a little bit. It starts to start seeing things differently. And I give that question to you, viewers, listeners. Do you know yourself? Have you spent time with yourself recently? And I'm not talking about like, I went on a hike. I had music playing the whole time.
I played a video game by myself.
Yeah, I played a video game. Yeah. It's like, no, I'm talking about pen and paper, sitting down, having a conversation with yourself. Maybe that's easier said than done. I was an only child of divorced parents, so I had a lot of time by myself, talking to myself. But I think it's important that you have a dialogue with your closest ally, right? Your subconscious, your brain, your inner voice, your inner critic, your inner friend, whatever you want to call it. It can be whatever you want it to be, and it can be whatever you design it to be. But it's not easily designed, and it's not easily broken.
I wonder if the main thing when someone sits down to know themselves, I think to tell them to be, hey, sit down and know yourself. Like, that's a really big ask. I don't even know what that would even like kind of start with. But just off the top of the dome, if I had to tell somebody like, here's a direction, it's to identify your core values. Your definition of enough will be based off of those values. And when you do that value-driven reflection, I think that many people might see that if they value their family above all, working 80 hours a week to have quote unquote enough will never be able to give them more time with their family. Or they might realize that instead of comparing their life to somebody that they see on their Instagram feed, they could ask themselves, would I trade my entire life with theirs? Would I trade everything that I know, lose all of the things that I find valuable to have their life just for this one aspect? I would say that is a pretty scary proposition every time. And maybe that as you're trying to find your values, you start to realize that we could replace our external benchmarks, our income, our possessions, with internal ones.
Yes.
Satisfaction, fulfillment, purpose. But in order to find those things, we need to have our values aligned. And in a society in which it is systemically built in for us to not look at those values, it is Like our system is meant for us to just strive for more, 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 and more, and more. Go to work for 40 hours a week, make money, spend that money to feel like you're enough. 40 hours isn't working for you? Try 50, try 60, try 80. Keep going more and more and more and more and more to achieve more and more and more and more and more to be enough. And I think we've been doing this experiment for the past 100 odd years, and it's not working. It's getting even worse. We have a loneliness epidemic. This is the first time in history that we have an epidemic of loneliness. Obesity is through the roof. Childhood mortality is through the roof. Suicide is through the roof. For the first time in history, people are going backwards in terms of lifespan. Maybe not history, record, like as far as we know.
Yeah.
Young men are dying at a rate that we have never seen before. And it's from their own hands. And I think it's because the system is meant to keep you feeling like you are never there. Does what you have now allow you to live the life you want? Or are you chasing more for its own sake?
I think that's a brilliant question. And I think with that being said, we should go to our action step for the week.
I would agree with that. So on the journey to financial independence, it isn't just about reaching a magic number. It's about finding peace with what is enough and living a life aligned with your values. So this week we have 2 action steps. One's a little difficult. One's really easy. The first one is I want you to go back, pen and paper, or sit down with ChatGPT and talk to it or meditate on it. But I want you to actually put it somewhere physical that you can actually see it. Don't just talk to yourself in your head, because you give yourself too many outs when the conversation gets hard. You shift the conversation immediately. And I think if you were to actually track the way your brain works and the way you talk to yourself, it changes momentarily. The moment it gets hard, you change the subject. So it's to sit down and to begin to know thyself. Start to look internally and find out what your values are. Don't go to ChatGPT and ask, what are my values? Don't ask your parents, what are your values? Don't ask your partner. Ask yourself, what are your values? And if it takes 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, days, weeks, years, I want you to start there and find that out, because everything that is built on, we can't know until we have that foundation. Once we've done that, as we've done that, I want you to ask yourself this question. What would my life look like if I decided that I already had enough and that I already was enough? And then go out and try living it like that right now. Not forever, not for eternity, just right now. And then next now, you can decide if you want to do it. That's my goal. And I hope that you got some value out of this today. If you did, please like and subscribe to the podcast. As I've said before, we can see that we're getting a lot of downloads, but we're not getting as many subscribers. And when you guys do subscribe, it's not just for us to pump up our own chests. It's so that we can go to other people to tell them, hey, we have this many subscribers. Come on our podcast so you can reach more of an audience. So we can bring you, our audience members, better people for you. And yes, better people for us, because I love having good conversations with good people who can expand our world. And if you found value, please share the podcast with one person. Bring them along for this journey, because you go so much further together than you do alone. And I just want you to be left with this concept of what is enough. It starts with gratitude, it starts with reflection, and it starts with alignment with your values, not with comparison. When you stop chasing what others have, you'll see that your cup might already be overflowing. And with that, we'll see you on Friday. Later.
Peace.
This video podcast is sponsored by Monzon Wealth. The content in this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial advice. We do not endorse specific products or services. Past performance does not guarantee future results. The opinions expressed are those of the host and guests, not the podcast sponsor.
It is crucial to consult with a qualified financial advisor or professional who can provide advice tailored to your specific needs before making any financial decisions, investments, or taking any other actions. If you are seeking specified help, you can reach out to Chris at monzonwealth.com.